in adapting the novel, I think it's almost like I've I think for some people they feel like we've done something that's just like too obviously direct in terms of its parallels to the current administration, and it's like, no, that's
That's
just
the book. Yeah.
that was there. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I think what's appealing about it for me was also just a chance to sort of be in Roth's world a bit. I mean, I know I read all these books. I've read this sort of his book about his father patrimony, and so to get to sort of try to embody this character that in some ways I feel like I know pretty well was really exciting.
What would you say is the most fascinating part of that world?
Um, of the world of our book, or the, sort of Roth's world?
I would say Ross world to start, yeah, because I feel like that's an interesting world to kind of be in mentally.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that appeals to me about Roth is often his unabashed sort of sexual obsession and his linguistic exuberance, and some of that stuff, particularly the sort of Rothian sexuality, really isn't in this book. Um, but what is in this book is sort of his tricksiness in using his own, fictionalizing his own family, and this sense of immediacy that you get as a result of that, but then your sort of constant awareness that Roth, the author, is manipulating your sort of understanding of who these people are. And that you're also, furthermore, it's all being filtered through the memory of an 8-year-old child who may or may not have accurately grasped what was going on around him. And I think actually that the sort of uncertainty of perspective is something that David Simon and Ed Burns have adapted really well in our story, because I think you do see at times, you do understand that you're seeing it through the eyes of these children, but then there are also moments where you think you're seeing it through Herman's eyes, but then you shift perspective to Bess and you get a vantage point on Herman that allows you to see, what a schmuck he's being, and I think one thing that our series does that I think is really fascinating is we go a lot more into the world of Bengelsdorf
Mm-hmm.
and the world of Evelyn, these people who are really sort of collaborating with a very ugly regime. Um, and I think that to get, as a result, we sort of flesh out and humanize those characters, and I think that makes it a more pointed critique of people who are sort of, I don't know, like all these like never Trump Republicans, for instance, who have all like become liberal heroes but are all like Bush administration ghouls. You know what I mean? All people
Yeah.
who fought for the Iraq War, and now because they have, the wherewithal to recognize that this guy's a goon, like, we're all supposed to celebrate that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
It's interesting to get into that world a little bit.
it most certainly is, and it's really complicated. And it's like, who are the storytellers? What's the perspective we're coming from? And it's like, also, where will people draw the line? Because, like you said, it's like it's one thing during the Bush administration. Here we are in the Trump administration,
Yeah.
and the same thing back then. It's like, how far will people bend? I think is a really interesting concept.
Yeah. No, and we find ourselves, I think economic crises put a lot of stress on a country's politics and on democracy specifically. And I think these were this question of how far people would be pushed, and when does a nominal democracy stop being a democracy? I think those were questions that were on people's minds in the aftermath of the Depression. I think there are questions that were on people's minds in the aftermath of the financial crisis, 2008. Obviously, we're in the midst of another crisis that has the potential to dwarf both of those. Maybe not the Depression; things are sort of different, but yeah, I don't know how we're going to come out the other side of this.
Yeah.
And I do think that, it's definitely been revealed that our country is not built to care for its citizens in any kind of broad or egalitarian way. And I think that, there's a real question of how will people respond now that that's been shoved in all of their faces in a truly mortal way. When we know people, your friends, your neighbors, your relatives have died of this disease because this country failed to prepare for something that was obviously on the horizon. What will we do about that? I think it's an open question, obviously.
Yeah, I think the self-serving nature of government is always something we're thinking about throughout. And, I think it's interesting for you as an actor. It's like you play these roles that challenge you and push you. With this project specifically, what did you learn about yourself as an actor?
Um, don't know. I think you always, any new person that you try to embody, it expands your sense of who you are. But I think weirdly, this one for me was to some extent about burrowing down into my sense of my own family, my memories of my grandparents, who were sort of relatively near to this milieu. And in some ways, that's actually comfortable. Like it also, there's something Herman does, which I was, Herman sort of, he goes back and back to his own rage, to his own like sense of indignation. And he does it so much that I think you start to realize that it's a comfort to him, even if he doesn't, that like his own sense of outrage is a comfortable place for him to be. And I relate to that. It's something I recognize in my own life, that it's very easy, I think, to, to find it, this sort of moment of being, I'm outraged. It gives you that sense of, moral righteousness, really,
Right.
and not necessarily to any point. Like it's an emotional indulgence, and especially when you see a guy like this, he's in a room with children and his wife, and they just end up having to deal with his feelings and that rage, and it's not necessarily easy for them. It's like maybe makes it a little harder for them to get through the day, and I think it's a good thing to recognize, actually, that that indulgence is, it's not necessarily helpful.
No, it's not helpful. It can be comfortable at times, and it just also puts in perspective like what we spin our wheels on and how it actually doesn't really matter in the grander scheme of things. And it's like we could just really easily get stuck in our own heads, and the people in our lives are kind of off to the side there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.